Welcome back to Sunday School, everyone. I'm Jared Anderson, and this is Engaging Gospel Doctrine, episode 369.2, which covers the Come Follow Me material for May 17th. I am calling this Covenant, Surrender, and Deliverance. This is Book of Mormon, week 18, and it covers Mosiah 18 through 24. Quick fundraising podcast check-in. I really appreciate those who have stepped up and donated. We are still hundreds of dollars a month below where we need to be. So one thing I'm going to do as a fun incentive is I'm going to give away one of the most precious things I have, which is my personal copy of Tom Wayment's translation of the New Testament. So he signed it, and then I spent the entire year annotating it. So this has all of my notes. And what I think I'll do is take the 3 highest donors from January to June and randomly select one of them. And then I'll send you this personalized New Testament. And I'm still going to be moving forward on this core group of donors to keep the podcast sustainable. So if you are in a place to donate to the podcast, please do so. COVID check-in, I won't go too deeply into this. Do wear your masks. We are starting to reopen, physical distancing, but try to be careful. Wash your hands, wear masks in public. This is part of the new normal, is being really careful around hygiene, being careful and aware when we're around other people. So hopefully you are all handling that as well as possible. This lesson I'm calling Covenant and Deliverance, and I hope you enjoyed the reissued episode that I put out. It is really nice to have that earlier episode so that you can enjoy that through the next week or two, and I can get the update as soon as I can. It would have been earlier, but my daughter begged me to play Frisbee, and my boys want to do planks with me. And I'm podcasting in between. There are some very powerful life lessons in these readings. We have a blueprint for community in Mosiah 18, really good guidelines for showing up for each other, a tale of 2 kings, Limhi versus his father Noah, and then we have a tale of 2 liberations, Limhi versus Alma. And then after we dig into the scriptures, I want to make it personal for us. What has us in bondage? And how do we liberate ourselves? And then I'll conclude. Mosiah 18 is absolutely amazing. And it really does provide this beautiful blueprint for community. I love the Baptismal Covenant. Alma says, "As ye are desirous to come into the fold of God, be called his people, are willing to bear one another's burdens that they may be light, and are willing to mourn with those that mourn, yea, and comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and stand as witnesses of God at all times and in all things and in all places that ye be in, even unto death, that ye may be redeemed of God, and be numbered with those of the first resurrection, that ye may have eternal life. Now I say unto you, if this be the desire of your hearts, what have you against being baptized in the name of the Lord, as a witness before him that you have entered into a covenant with him, that ye will serve him and keep his commandments, that he may pour out his Spirit more abundantly upon you." I think it's very powerful that Alma first talks about the covenant community, the agreement that we have with our fellow human beings. This is amazing. We agree to help each other, show up for each other, and show empathy and really just treat each other as people, where another person's life or experience or suffering is as important as our own. As I said last time, I think these are some of the most precious verses in Scripture. This is what being a member of the church is about, and so beautiful and specific, worth pondering and internalizing. The key theme of these verses is that we belonging. We belong to each other. We belong to God. And because we belong to each other, we care for each other. So we have fold of God, called his people. bear one another's burdens. Is there any better summary of a relationship than this? The purpose of life, the purpose of community, lift the heavy things so they are lighter. Be there for each other. This is what humans do. In fact, one of the most fascinating things I've learned is that humans are the only creature, the only species that cooperate flexibly in large groups. That is exactly why we became dominant and that we've basically overtaken the entire earth for better and worse. Mourn with those that mourn. Remember, we are not comforting those that mourn. In fact, a big part of ministry training was to learn specifically how not to comfort those that mourn. A few secrets. Most of us want to help, but we don't know how. I call this the empathy backfire effect. Other people's pain and discomfort makes us hurt and feel uncomfortable. So when we try to make others feel better, too often we are trying to make ourselves feel better. So comfort those that in need of comfort. Mourn, then comfort. This is the proper order. When we hurt and grieve, we feel the hurt, we let it run its course, and the wound then heals. And we can also comfort, take care of needs, and facilitate that process. This is ministry that President Nelson has emphasized so much. And then we have the God part. We are covenanting with God to serve God, and mostly serve God by taking care of each other. As Jesus taught and King Benjamin taught, I love how connected the first and second great commandments are. And then Spirit poured more abundantly. When the people heard these words, they clapped their hands for joy and exclaimed, "This is the desire of their hearts." Just take a moment and ask yourself, what makes you clap with joy? Sometimes I get so excited, I bounce up and down and I dance with happiness. I still believe that Helaman is Alma's father. I think that's very plausible. President Joseph Fielding Smith said, "We may conclude that Alma held the priesthood before he with others became disturbed with King Noah. Whether this is so or not makes no difference, because in the book of Mosiah, it is stated definitely that he had authority." So Alma and Helaman are buried in the water together. This is a renewal baptism for both of them, probably being filled with the Spirit. They are called the Church of God. Just really good stuff. And then we learn more about their community. There are very consistent themes in the Book of Mormon about ideal community. There's no contention, looking forward to one eye, one faith, one baptism, having their hearts knit together in unity and love. So again, the fundamental aspect of community, love, covenantal community, and our baptismal covenant is that we take care of each other like family. We treat each other as well as we treat ourselves, and we treat ourselves well. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. This is everything. And thus, in this way, they became children of God. This is another specific teaching in the Book of Mormon and in the scriptures. We become children of God by taking care of each other, by covenanting to care for each other like a family. So they work hard, they worship, and they're receiving the grace of God. They are teaching. And again, this theme is very clear. Thus, they should impart of their substance, of their own free will and good desires toward God, and to those priests that stood in need, and to every naked and needy soul, imparting to one another both temporally and spiritually according to their needs and wants. Note once again that we are commanded to give according to needs and wants, Mosiah 4:26. And I really love this idea, and I wish this is how the economy worked in our day and age as well. I think the ideal kind of economy would be something like a very basic universal income that cared for us so we weren't dying of starvation and in desperate need. And then on top of that, I think that there should be very strong incentives to produce, to contribute and so forth. So be given your basic needs, and then work for anything beyond that, and then do good and share as we can. A Tale of Two Kings, Limhi versus Noah. I saw a post on Facebook, I think it was by my friend Jackson, who said Trump is King Noah. And I find myself agreeing. This isn't about politics. This is about human decency, protecting human life, and literally the fate of human civilization. Look carefully at the events that lead up to King Noah's death. Also note that Limhi and his people claimed moral and personal freedom, even though they went into captivity. We'll talk about captivity and freedom in just a moment. So first, about King Noah, Gideon hunts down Noah. Lamanites threaten Noah's people. Noah says, run away. Mormon has no patience for Noah. He's very clear that Noah only cares about his own life. The Lamanites catch up. This is the darkest point. Noah says, leave your wife and children to die and save yourselves. And most people don't. Most of the people do not abandon their wives and children, including Limhi. And then even those who do run then regret it. Noah says, run away again. And then finally, the people put Noah to death. Unfortunately, Noah's priests run away. They commit to abandonment, and they are trapped in this cycle of shame and guilt that causes so many problems. Really evil. And then Limhi's people are safe, but in captivity to the Lamanites. Mosiah 20, note that the priests of Noah are acting out of fear, shame, anger, and reactivity. Once again, we have these fundamental themes of bondage versus freedom, agency versus avoidance. I really love 2 Nephi 2, where it says the purpose of the gospel is to act and not be acted upon. And we'll talk about increasing agency in just a moment. I really love and find powerful these back-to-back stories of Limhi's bondage and liberation versus Alma's bondage and liberation. And so look very carefully at those. With Limhi, they need to problem solve. It's really, really bumpy. There are aggressions. The Lamanites and Limhi's people keep the surface level of the agreement, but they're picking fights. And note that Limhi only submits when there is no other choice. They fight and die and suffer, and then they submit. Whereas Alma submits immediately. Now, as I said in last episode, I think there's a great cost to this. I still think that Alma the Younger grew up under Amulon's persecution. And it's very interesting the way that Alma the Younger words Alma 5. It's pretty clear that he grew up during this time of persecution. And when Alma says, Amulon caused, or Mormon summarizes, Amulon caused his children to persecute Alma's children, that was very likely Alma the Younger. Again, the inspiring thing is that Alma immediately submits and surrenders. And this is so, so important. And I have such a testimony of this. And all of us are both Limhi and Alma. Sometimes we submit immediately, and sometimes we need to suffer the consequences before we will submit. I am grateful that I genuinely do try to submit to reality and God's will as quickly and efficiently as possible. So what has us in bondage? Free on the inside. That's the title of a version of the Bible meant for prisoners. Not surprisingly, I have a much greater sensitivity to issues relating to bondage and freedom after working in prison for the past 3 years. The goal of the entire gospel could be summarized as to increase our agency, increase our freedom in order to better love. So the alchemy of the gospel is to metabolize agency to love. Isn't that beautiful? We are here to transform agency into love. That's a great summary of the atonement. Think for a moment about the different levels of bondage that we're in. We're under tremendous constraints as human beings. There are the limits of the physical world. There are the limits of our bodies, which is our capacity, our strength, our health. There are the limits of our brains, how our brains work. And my passion, obsession, and ministry, a fun turn of phrase came to me this week. I love behavioral and cultural design. I am passionate about understanding all these limitations that have power over us. And I'm obsessed with this question of how can we increase our freedom? How can we use our agency well? So as I often say in this podcast, these are my favorite topics. So what limits does society put on us? What are the norms and roles and scripts? And this was hard for me. We also are very limited by our context. In my first marriage, I prayed, like, please fix me, change me. And it was very sobering to realize that my divorce was the answer to my prayer. As I've shared, one of the most powerful spiritual experiences I've ever had is when I experienced the voice of God saying, who are you to say that your children don't need to come from a broken home in order to be what they need to be and do what they need to do? And these are framings that I would not have come up with on my own. And I pray that we all can have courage to change our contexts when that is the answer that we need. We have the limitations of our families, our level of family support, but also genetics, patterns, roles, our upbringing. We have the limits of our thoughts, including thought patterns. We have the limits of our habits, the limits of our addictions. And again, I'm familiar with the word of wisdom, but we all have addictions. We are all addicted to certain behaviors as well as chemicals. Because whether we're addicted to sugar or caffeine or soda or processed flour or whatever it may be, or whether we are addicted to certain kinds of patterns and relationships and so forth, it's all electrochemical brain stuff. So the limits of our addictions and the limits of our practices. So it would be a really fun activity with those that you're discussing. What limits are there? We can't fly, we can't levitate. So how does the physical world limit you? How do your bodies limit you? How do your brains limit you? How does society limit you? How does your context limit you? How does your family limit you? How do your thoughts limit you? How do your habits limit you? How do your addictions limit you? And how do your practices change you? And I think if we change our practices and change our contexts, everything else will follow. So how do we liberate ourselves? I really love Elder Uchtdorf's talk, A Matter of a Few Degrees. He summarizes, through years of serving the Lord and in countless interviews, I have learned that the difference between happiness and misery in individuals, in marriages, and families often comes down to an error of only a few degrees. And if you'll forgive me for quoting Westworld, one of my favorite quotes is, free will exists, it's just really hard. And that's my summary. I have such a testimony of that. I deeply believe this. I've lived it. Free will is hard. Using our agency is hard. It's simple. It's staggeringly simple, but it's also staggeringly hard. So what is the path to freedom? In my experience, the path to freedom begins with radical honesty. Because if we cannot be honest with ourselves, you're not even in the game. You're not even really showing up. And I have found that what prevents us from honesty, rigorous honesty, is fear and avoidance and laziness. So we're afraid of what's true. And we're especially afraid of the work that the truth will require. One thing that I've learned from hospice is that most of us spend our lives avoiding living our lives. And most of us find the idea of genuinely taking full accountability and genuinely waking up and genuinely showing up to our lives terrifying and exhausting and overwhelming. I'm embarrassed as I look back and see how avoidant I was. Look around you and see who's doing your work. Remember that your thoughts are your responsibility, your feelings are your responsibility, your actions are your responsibility. I've quoted Will Smith multiple times. I really love his summary, not my fault, my responsibility. All of us are responsible for our own lives. Some other paths to freedom is feel your feelings without judgment, with curious, compassionate acceptance. And I have also found it very helpful to be very specific. What I am feeling now is overwhelmed. What I'm feeling now is very overdrawn. I am taking on way too much in my life right now. I'm working very, very hard to work toward my goals. I have a lot to get in order so that I can join the military, which I'm very excited about. And I'm working on this 2-year training program and trying to pull it off in 3 months. And things are coming together, it was super sweet. So at dinner, my daughter said, "Dad, will we have time to play Frisbee?" So I went and played Frisbee before I recorded this. But feeling your feelings without judgment, often we shame ourselves for our thoughts and feelings, which backfires. Whereas if we can have even scary thoughts and be like, that's interesting. I wonder why I'm having these violent thoughts toward this friend or whatever it may be. Or I wonder what it means that I'm attracted to my coworker. We're usually very afraid and avoidant around these. But if we're like, okay, any thought is allowed, any feeling is allowed, I am going to be responsible for my behavior. I am going to act with integrity in my behavior. Another secret to freedom is resist nothing and to love what is. I used to exhaust myself being idealistic and being like, but things should be like this. This isn't right. And it's true. The world is deeply broken. The world is deeply messed up. Our systems are deeply unfair. Life is very difficult. Again, it's been so powerful and transformative to serve the dying and the imprisoned. Reality is the only thing there is to love. And again, I resisted this for a long time, but I can say I'm doing a much, much better job loving reality, loving what is. Another one of my mantras or vows is give things the attention they deserve. Nothing more, nothing less. So I went and played Frisbee with my kids because they deserve my attention. The podcast deserves more of my attention than I'm able to give it. So do my jobs deserve more of my attention. When people escalate, when people try to pick a fight, that doesn't deserve our attention. And that's what Jesus meant when he said, turn the other cheek and don't resist when people persecute you and when people pick a fight. It's very disarming, literally and metaphorically, when someone's being aggressive and you're like, okay, I hear you. I'm sorry. If you did anything and, I'm going to disengage or, let's move on, but you don't escalate. Really quick story. I was helping my daughter move a couch and we didn't know that moving the couch down 4 flights of stairs would be the easy part. We were going to leave it on the edge of the road to, marked free or whatever. And someone leaned out of the window and said, you can't leave it there. And so we're like, okay. But unfortunately, my daughter's boyfriend started escalating the situation. He started yelling at this older guy My daughter's boyfriend was also carrying a gun at the time, and this was pretty concerning. And so I went in and I de-escalated the situation, and it ended up working out okay. And I helped my daughter's boyfriend dismantle this entire couch. My hand still hurts because of it. We broke apart this couch and then put it in the dumpster. But give attention where it is deserved, nothing more, nothing less. And that requires us to be the master of our own feelings and emotions. I've shared before that I have very intense, even overwhelming emotions. And one of the best things about chaplain training, and specifically sitting with the dying, is I feel so much more grounded and rooted. And I feel I can be calm. I can be more calm and grounded than I ever imagined was possible. Also, gently hold our stories. I have definitely been guilty of being overly persuaded by my own narrative. And I find it very helpful to say, the story I'm telling myself is. This is a great way to check in with yourself, great way to check in with your loved ones. And then again, change your context if needed, including relationships. So practice radical honesty, feeling your feelings with curious acceptance, resist nothing, love what is, give things only the attention that they deserve, gently hold your stories, choose new practices. Little moments are everything, and change your context if needed. I linked to the book Conscious Living. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is so good. And Gay Hendricks talks about the goal of life being actually to show up to yourself and to living, plug yourself into the divine self, the flow of life, show up. How do you do it? What is the way? It is an intense practice and work, but it is everything. These are some additional keys to freedom. Face reality squarely. Usually it's a feeling or a truth. My ex-girlfriend said that her mom shared that if she went to counseling again, she would have to divorce her husband. And very often we have feelings we aren't facing. We have truths we aren't facing. I personally believe that if every single person stood up to the truth, most marriages would fail. I think like 99% of marriages would fail. And that why so many people are miserable. And that's a bold statement. I really believe that the reason so many marriages are miserable is because we've trained each other into gridlock. And we've trained each other and communicated that it isn't safe to be fully honest with each other. And I believe that, well, let me restate. I believe if every single person fully stood up for their truth, 99% of marriages or relationships would be at risk. And then it would depend on whether the members of those relationships stepped up, became vulnerable. So this is Hendricks' suggestion. Face reality squarely, accept what is, choose and commit, really show up, really follow through, put your heart into soul and soul into choice, and take action. Do you see how those go together? So face reality squarely, be honest with yourself, accept that reality, choose and commit to reality, and then do what reality leads you to do. So pray that God will help you see the truth so the truth can set you free. Submit to God, thy will be done. I love that. Love. I love how in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done, and in the Gethsemane prayer, thy will be done. It's this combination of will is willpower, determination, force of personality, and then we take that will and we submit it. We submit to God. We submit to reality. And once we know what God's will is, we do it. One thing that's a blessing and a curse is I'm very driven and I'm very relentless. And when I know that something is right, I just move forward very quickly, very powerfully. And I'm working on cultivating gentleness and dosing with myself and with others. So in conclusion, I pray that all of us can embrace our agency and freedom. Life teaches us, and we have the choice of being kind of beaten to death by life, or we can submit as soon as possible to life. One of my favorite lessons from this reading, from Alma's bondage, is that we are made strong while we are still in bondage. I hope that all of us will first learn to find joy and peace in the difficult moments, because then no matter what happens, we are already free. We are already free. I don't think I shared this last time where I had my insight that life is not primarily about work or even learning or hurting. Life is primarily about love, joy, play, alignment, flow. Maybe I did share that last episode, but it's still just blowing my mind. I have a deep testimony that the plan of salvation is set up so that we are to learn and grow within suffering, within hardships. As Carl Fred Broderick said in his essay on adversity, the gospel is not insurance against pain. It is a resource in the inevitable event of pain. The purpose of the gospel is not to save us from pain. The purpose of the gospel is not to save us from hardship. The purpose of the gospel is to teach us the way to move through life so that we can maximize our agency, so we can maximize our peace and joy and freedom and growth, so that even in the midst of difficulty, not even perhaps, we don't value the sweet unless we feel the bitter. And the beauty of life, the beauty of this conscious human experience, is that we experience bitter and sweet and joy and sorrow all together. And the promise of the gospel is that if we will submit to God as quickly, smoothly as possible, with the least resistance possible, God will bless us so we feel peace and joy, and our burdens will be light. And then once we feel that transformation of our character, where we feel joy in pretty much any situation, we then help and serve each other. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engaging Gospel Doctrine. And again, thank you so much for those who are supporting the podcast. If you want to be in the running for my copy of the New Testament, please do donate as you can so we can keep this podcast sustainable. And in future episodes, I'll talk about the core group of donors. Thank you.